Shalom, everyone. Welcome to another Sabbath Insight. And, I want to get right into it. Today, I want to sort of dismantle and dissect the surface level joy sold to us as happiness. And more importantly, the version we're fed is really a consumer product. It's a chemical rush. But in occult sciences, happiness only truly comes as an energetic signature of alignment with the divine order. So I want to take an opportunity to look at what we would call modern Black cinema and how it's really become a grimoire of sorts, or a collection of ritual texts, if you wonder what a grimoire is. But I would say like modern Black cinema, is a collection of ritual texts that are in motion. So there's this sort of idea of embedding prophecy into entertainment, and films are not just stories. As many people think, oftentimes they're rituals that are broadcast and encoded, even escape plans that can be encoded inside of what you would call, cinema or entertainment. They're loaded with occult frameworks, sigils, archetypes, and oftentimes they carry fragments of truth, um, for those who have trained eyes, but at the same time also hiding truth behind like layers of inversion and glamour. Those two words are very important. So I'm gonna sort of dig into that a little bit this dawning or this afternoon or this evening, whenever you're tuning in and checking out this information and this insight. And I really want to get into how modern Black films, like I said, act as cinematic grimoires, and sort of what they're loaded with and what they carry and so forth and so on. I know we didn't do a segment last session. I had the beautiful and wonderful honor of being present again this year for the 56th annual American, the Association of Black Psychologists Incorporated, ABPSI. So ran into always, I get to see some colleagues I haven't seen all year, or some of them I have seen in other events, or we've worked together and stuff like that. So it's always beautiful to be present and be amongst people who are sort of aiming in a similar direction for the work that we do as psychologists, but in particular, psychologists who are focusing on the liberation and the understanding of the what we would call the African psyche, or the Black mind. So that was held at Bethune-Cookman College down there in Daytona Beach, Florida. So yeah, it was beautiful event this year. Of course, as always, you get to build with your elders and check in with them and see what they're talking about, and you know how they're growing and evolving, as well as the younger ones who are coming up. Of course, like Naeem Akbar was there, and Baba Wade Nobles, and Dr. Nichols was there. These are names that some of you may not be familiar with, but those of you who function within the psychiatric and psychology world, you know who they are. Like your Amos Wilsons and, individuals like that. But yeah, so this is why I was going to try to push it and still do an insight, but I decided no, let me just put my energy where it needs to be for now. So again, welcome again. This is Chief Yuya. For those of you who it's first time, never seen me, never been here, and just stumbled upon, or the video was recommended, welcome. My name is Chief Yuya, or my title rather. So let's get into, like I spoke about, the illusion of happiness that's sold to us in media. One of the first things I understand is that Hollywood operates as a ritual lodge. It's from its architecture, from the award shows, the red carpets, all of it. It's a mirror of esoteric mystery schools. So you have directors, and your directors are like your high priests. and they craft these cinematic sort of rites that use archetypes and use sigils. And what they're really doing is they're executing alchemical inversions, and those inversions are meant to redefine happiness, and not necessarily as a state of divine alignment, but to redefine happiness as power stripped of principle and power stripped of moral compass, right? So it's important to understand because many of us sort of fall for the okey doke, when it comes to, I've seen so many people, especially like couples that I've counseled and people that I've worked with, come into the room, the proverbial room, depending on what we're meeting. And one of the first things is, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy. I'm not happy. And, you have to show that level of compassion and you got to listen. But in my mind, a lot of times I'm like, I could tell you don't even know what happiness is. You don't even know what that is. So you're, or some people say love. This person doesn't love me. Do you even know what love is? Do you know what joy really is? Do you know what happiness really is? Or have you been tricked into this sort of surface level illusion of what these things are? And oftentimes, unfortunately, that is what it is. But, I was looking at or thinking about the movie The Woman King that came out a couple of years ago, I think. I'm not good with time, so it could have been last year, but I feel like it was at least about 2 years ago. I could be off, but that was a perfect example of cinematic inversion. The Woman King movie, it tells like a story of your typical story of triumph, but it operates as a full inversion, right? The film's happiness is what we call the clipothic inversion or the clipothic glamour. That's a Kabbalistic term. When you have the tree of life, you have the clip off and then you have the front of the tree. And the clip off is the dark, unseen side, right? So, like when it speaks about Adoma and Hawa taking the fruit there is called the Ath. It doesn't even say fruit, it's the Ath, right? So knowledge, but the Ath is not like Yada. Yada is a knowing, and the Ath is a hidden knowing, or like you could say almost occultic. It's a hidden knowledge, Dath or Da'at, like Darth Vader or Darth Vader. So to get to the hidden knowledge, you got to go through the clip off. So when you hear the term clipothic glamour, it's speaking about, especially in Hollywood, it's a spiritual corpse, if you will, that's animated by a false light. So if you look at like just to kind of go through a little bit, you look at the Woman King right in the very beginning of the movie. There's this battle scene there, and it's at dawn. So anytime you have like a battle scene at dawn, it's an invocation to the solar energy. It's a solar invocation, which draws Mars, the Mars energy to glorify bloodshed, right? If you look at what they were wearing, and even in their adornments, sort of the dominant use of red and gold. Those are ritual colors in magic as well, because red is sacrifice. It symbolizes sacrifice, symbolizes war, and gold represents triumph, or but more so global triumph. And gold also is associated with ego. So that's an inversion of actual divine enlightenment. The weapons are used as like sigils. The blades they're not just like tools that are used, but they're instruments of severance. They're cutting something away. In that sense, they're acting as a sigil force. So when they act as that sigil, they reinforce the cutting spiritual ties from ancestral order. That's sort of like the symbology of the blades in that sense. In that visualization, cutting things away. Of course, in The Woman King, you have definitely these symbols of matriarchal hierarchy. So the film sort of elevates an all-female warrior council, while at the same time it erases a balancing masculine presence. And that balancing masculine presence, because it's royals coming from the king, it would be rooted in cosmic law. So that's like, I say a typical or like a textbook example of inversion magic, where you have initiation rites also that in the movie where there's this like hazing. There's like these hazing rituals that are done for new warriors, And that's symbolic of occult initiation ordeals. People, just like your fraternities, your sororities, you go through this sort of hazing experience. And that hazing is designed to strip you of identity and replace it with a loyalty to the state, or loyalty to the organization, whatever it is that you're functioning with and functioning out of. Then you see also in the Woman King, there's choreographed dances, and that functions as what we would call like a rhythmic spell work. So when you have a group incantation that's aimed at conquest and not necessarily spiritual elevation, right? So like if we're chanting something as a group and it's based around like, it could even be something that's homicidal, right? There's a segment, not a segment. There's a song I did a while ago. I forgot the name of the song. But I'm playing a lot of drums in it, and it's the chant is ayo 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 taweto, right? Now that's a chant. I can't believe I forgot the name of that song. I tell you, even when it comes to music, the memory part has always been my challenge for years as a professional musician. We'd be on stage and they would call out a song, be like, all right, such and such, on four, 1, 2, 3. And I would never come in on that one because I would always like, I don't know the name of the song. Once I hear it, oh, we playing that. Okay. But I never remember the name of songs. I don't know, some weird sort of defect. But I can tell you what key, I can tell you what BPM it is, the chords, the chord structure, everything, but the time signature. But yeah, I don't remember the name, and it's my own song, and I forgot. But I sing something like, I don't run from a little rain, The, the melody, something like that. Da, 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 da. Reach high, swim low, something, 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 something. Yeah. But nonetheless, there's a chant that I'm saying in it, right? And when my brother first heard the song, he was like, yo, why you shouting out Y-O? He was like, you going Y-O, Y-O. So he thought I was shouting out Yonkers, because that's what we call it. In New York, we call it Yonkers, Y-O, right? I was like, yo, I'm not shouting out Y-O, imbecile. But it was, if you ever watched the movie Roots, and the the older version, with LeVar Burton and Amos Wilson and Louis Gossett, go on the names, right? Cicely Tyson. There were so many beautiful people in there. Babatunde was in that movie as well. In the very beginning, they just showed a flash of him going by though when they were in the village, Olatunji. But nonetheless, there's a chant that they sing on the boat, and they're going weird to, weird to, weird to, and it's the same chant that he's saying when he's on the boat and he's cutting away his chain, weird to, weird to, weird to. And then when they do their actual revolt on the boat, he says it, and then he says it loud, weird to. That's actually what I was singing in the song, and I'm not going to say what it means, but I'll just say that it's homicidal, right? So that's an example of like the Woman King. They're doing incantations that's aimed at conquest, but not spiritual elevation. If you're doing an incantation, it should be to raise your vibrational energy towards spiritual freedom. Then when you see like the closing scene in the victory, you have this triumphant queen who's sealing. Her triumph is like a sealing right, because it imprints the inversion as aspirational, right? So the happiness that's offered is nothing. It's just a glamour, it's vibrant and it's colorful and it's amazing. And you might even cheer in the movie theater or wherever you saw it, but it's really divorced from eternal law, right? So a lot of times you have these prophetic sort of downloads that are hidden in cinema. Like I said, modern Black films are becoming like prophetic scrolls, really, and they're disguised as entertainment, but they're embedding instructions for the awakened, but they also are embedding warnings for the awakened. There was another film I was going to mention, Jamie Foxx was in it, as well as John Boyega, and that was the film They Cloned Tyrone that came out recently. And that's about identity theft, But the film encodes a sort of powerful prophecy in there as well about soul duplication, and about programmed identity, where they used urban satire as a cover for the occult, and there was a lot of occult commentary on mind control, and they cloned Tyrone, So if you look at it right in the beginning of the movie, it opens up to like these street scenes. There's what we call urban decay, there's fluorescent lighting, and these things, whenever you see that, just to give you some understanding in this segment, this insight, I'm going to give you little things that you can look for in films that you could kind of like use as your own lexicon as you're watching things like, okay, I see this. And like I always say, whatever I say something is, it doesn't mean that it is that thing. So I would never say like, oh, if you see a rose, it means someone's in love. But I might say if you see a rose, it could represent that someone is in love. It could represent that. It could represent something else as well. You think about the concept of the black rose, right? That was an older concept, the idea of seeing these black roses, which was something a little different. And I'm not going to say the context it came in. Maybe it'll invoke you to look it up. But how that was represented in the liberation struggle and the education struggle of the Black rose, right? But it was a love to a degree, but it was something even deeper, right? So symbols are all culturally contextual, and a symbol may speak to you different than it may speak to me or speak to someone else. It's a very unique thing. Some things are universal, and it's important to understand the universal truths instead of and be able to distinguish that from opinion or my truth, because that's how you get caught up in garbage religions, when you refuse to acknowledge universal truth, like we all can see the sun, we can feel the sun, right? And I'm talking about the yellow sun, not the real sun behind it, the black one, but we can feel the heat of the sun. So we can show and prove sun, we can show and prove moon, but when you sometimes start getting off into the weeds, everything gets super metaphysical and esoteric because you can't really prove it. A lot of people make their gods that way. They got invisible sky gods because they can't prove anything. But, if I say, well, my religion is water, I can show and prove H2O, I can show and prove water. But nonetheless, so going back to They Clone Tyrone, boom, the movie starts off, it's in the streets, urban decay, fluorescent lighting. And when you see that, oftentimes it's to evoke sort of images or ideas of the underworld. So it signals a liminal zone, if you will, and that's where reality and illusion blur with each other. When you see those type of symbols, then you have this underground lab, and they cloned that. And if you notice in that film, the underground lab has checkerboard floors, and it's like these very sterile sort of corridors directly. And that directly mirrors, Masonic tracing boards and initiate chambers. So that now immediately when you see that checkerboard, and which you see a lot, like in hospitals, in hospital scenes, you'll see the checkerboard, you see these very sterile hallways, so there's already a suggestive implication there for psychological programming when you see something like that, right? So now, then we look at some of the character archetypes right there in They Clone Tyrone. The cast serves as an alchemical cast, if you will. Fontaine, who's one of the characters, is the unaware initiate. Then you have Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo's the intuitive guide. Slick Charles, he's like the trickster figure, in the show. Then there's a cloning process, so you have these vats and these nutrient baths, which that echoes ancient alchemical vessels, which represents the artificial creation of life without a divine spark, right? Then you have in the film, again, They Clone Tyrone, you have these mind control mechanisms where they use consumer goods like hair products and like food as a means as control devices, which mirrors actually real world mind control, but it's MK Ultra style conditioning. Then in the film, you have this like sort of final confrontation where the reveal of the clones is like an apocalyptic sort of disclosure moment. It's this prophetic sort of metaphor for spiritual identity theft on a collective scale. which is so important, especially for those who are melanin rich living in America, who have had their nationhood stolen from them, and they've been tricked out of their nationhood. They've been tricked out of their language. They've been tricked out of their mores. They've been tricked out of their real God positionings. They've been tricked out of the way that they mate, tricked out of the way that they marry, tricked out of the way that they raise children. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So when you look at that film and you see that, okay, it's a metaphor for a collective thievery of spiritual identity, you start to see what's being said there. Another one I wanted to address was the Book of Clarence. That was a movie I really enjoyed a lot. And it was sort of a warning about false messiahs. The Book of Clarence, it sort of operates as a predictive programming for the age of false messiahs, warnings against imitations that are designed to dull your discernment. You see, a lot of times you have these fake teachers who come forth, fake conscious community people, and they get you to the point where they spout so much bull excrement at you that you lose your ability to properly discern. Again, one of the reasons why I don't really do spiritual consultations as much anymore, because a lot of people who work with me, they know, like, if you ask me something, I'm probably going to turn around immediately and say, well, what do you think? What do you feel? What does your intuition say? Before I give you an answer, because my job is not to dull your discernment, but to elevate it and cultivate it, But a false prophet wants to keep you asleep, basically, If you look at the Book of Clarence, of course, the setting is Jerusalem, and there's this sort of anachronistic sort of setting that signals that the narrative itself is a symbolic allegory and not necessarily a historical account. Clarence embodies the counterfeit Christos, or the counterfeit Christ, which is like a direct echo if you read Matthew 24:24, and he stages these tricks, right, that are used to sort of mimic divine acts that reflect the inverted occult principle of as above, so below, right? So now man is attempting to replicate heavenly signs, but without heavenly authority. You see, this is so very important because a lot of times we fall for, again, media, things that are on TV, if people even watch TV anymore at this point, but, things that you take in through media, and you say, man, that's how my life should look. That's how my life should be. But ask yourself, is there heavenly authority in the image that you're seeing, or is it just sold to you through vibrant colors and cool music and little snazzy jokes and witty jokes and warm moments and things like that? Or is heavenly authority stamped on it? 10 times out of 10, no, it's not. Anything that's coming out of Hollywood that's telling you the way, this is how things are supposed to be, there's never any sort of heavenly authority stamped on it. Even if you watch in so-called, I don't know what sort of shows they would call them, but like the gospel shows, I call them, like I think Meet the Browns is one, House of Pain. I know these are Tyler Perry creations, right? So you might be like, oh, these are like church shows, but they're not. Well, they're church shows, yeah, but they're not divine segments, right? So even in the Book of Clarence, you have these antagonistic forces who were represented by the Roman authorities. And then you had local skeptics who served as like personifications of the worldly and spiritual opposition that true anointed people have to face. If you really are anointed and you're doing this work, you're gonna face opposition and you're gonna face antagonism. And the bigger your opposition and the bigger your antagonism, the bigger your mission. That's just the reality. I've spoken about this before. People have said that to me, like, man, you always got something going. Like, you're always in the middle of something, or somebody's always coming at you. Yeah, because that's how big my mission is. I don't just sit in the house and chill. I don't Netflix and chill. I don't just go to work and then come home and chill. When you have a large purpose and a large mission, you really expose yourself. In fact, in the Book of Clarence, you have this sort of climatic exposure where there's a public unmasking of Clarence's falsehood, which functions as a humiliation ritual. and that's humiliation rituals, very similar to what you saw with Will Smith and Chris Rock when he smacked him on the, I guess that was the Oscars. Um, Humiliation rituals are done as a death before potential rebirth. That's the point of it. That's kind of the science of the humiliation ritual. There was another piece, Raising Dion. I don't know if you guys have checked that out. Yeah, a sister put me on to that. Raising Dion. The science there is like, again, that you see training the initiate. Where Raising Dion is sort of an allegory for the next generation's spiritual awakening. It shows how young initiates will be targeted, young initiates will be tested, and young initiates will be trained in the age of heightened surveillance, right? So if you look at sort of, again, the decoding and Raising Dion, it starts with a voiceover, the segment. Now, anytime you have films or whatever that starts with a voiceover, the narrative is framed as an initiate scroll. So if I have a show and it's like, here lies, or here is, Yuya Talib Asan Anu, the year is such and such, and he's doing this, he's doing that. What that's supposed to give you a subconscious sort of idea is that, like, this person has a scroll, and their scroll is sort of being read in that sense. So it prepares the viewer or the listener for a hero's journey. And the hero's journey is the Haru's journey, where everything is cool, something bad happens. I'm just making it like more simple. Everything is cool, something bad happens. The person then has to go on a journey to make things right again. And then at the end of their journey, they usually end up where they started, but they end up where they started evolved and better than where they were when they first started out, right? That's just a simple sort of way to put what a hero's journey is. So whenever you see a film, or you have a film and it opens up with a narrative, just immediately think scroll, and you know that you're being prepared for a hero's journey. Then you look at with Dion's powers, his abilities are linked to his emotional states, right? So that's another mirroring of esoteric teachings, that spiritual gifts are tied to inner balance, right? Then you have the Aurora event in Raising Dion, and that cosmic storm that happens, it symbolizes a dimensional tearing. Like when we talk about like the crossification of Yahweh Shah HaMashiach, or the crucifixion of Christ, or Jesus, however you term it. You read the scripture where it talks about the tearing of the veil. The veil has teared. When you get that, a lot of times in certain movies and shows, you'll have the beginning, like where somebody receives some kind of superpower or something, right? There'll be a storm, or like some sort of cosmic event or an eclipse or something like that. And what that represents is that's the moment that the initiate is activating the powers that were already inside of them, because there's been a tear between different dimensions, right? Then you have Pat's shadow form. Again, I'm still talking about Raising Dion, the crooked man. And the crooked man represents the archonic sort of parasites that feed off of fear and emotional chaos. Then you have these different training sort of montages, and those symbolize ceremonial training. Within a mystery school, there's moments where you have to learn how to control your energy, and the control over your energy that precedes higher knowledge, right? So a lot of times, even when you watch old kung fu movies, karate movies, whatever, the young student or the Padawan, like in Star Wars, they come in angry. Something happened to them. Maybe they're being bullied. Somebody stole their land, unalive their family, whatever it is. And they come to the school like, teach me so I can go back and get revenge. And the master won't work with them until they learn emotional regulation, because emotional regulation is more important than the knowledge that you're coming to me asking for. So that's a sign of that. Then you have, like with Raising Dion, you have school and you have these social struggles. And these are the trials of an initiate inside of a mundane world, which tests their ability to maintain a high vibration in a low frequency environment, right? So, a lot of people have sort of kind of gone to that, people have special powers. There's a lot of people out here with special powers. It's more common than you might think, right? Just just when you see it on film or in media, it's depicted a certain way where you're like, well, I can't fly, I can't, punch through brick walls. So so my ability to sense people coming before they round the corner, that ain't about nothing. Or the fact that I can put my hand on a book and tell you everything that's inside of it, when that ain't about nothing, because I can't shoot laser beams out my eyes, right? So you're sort of tricked again out of your divinity. But when you see Dion and he's got to function in social situations and he's got to function in school environments, he's high vibrational, but he's got to be around these low frequency environments and learn how to regulate himself in that space. That's a very common thing with people who are more awakened and more aware, if you will. And so then there's this final battle that he has with Pat, right? And that confrontation is a mirror of the occultic dark night of the soul. If you ever heard that term, the dark night of the soul, where now the initiate must now face their shadow self before they're able to ascend to the higher levels. Again, you see that in Star Wars and New Hope, where Luke Skywalker had to go into that dark space when he was training with Master Yoda, and he saw his father. He saw at that time, I don't think he knew it was his father at that time. I could be wrong, but he saw Darth Vader, and he cuts the mask, and it's him under the mask. That's the dark night of the soul, right? Everyone has this dark side to address. You see that in the movie Us as well. So each of the films, if you look at, they sort of blend entertainment with ritualistic or ritual disclosure. So from the color codes, the symbols, the archetypes, everything is intentional. So they serve as snares to entrap you, but also as escape maps to get out. So our happiness is reclaimed, if you will, when we view the works as encrypted prophecy. When we extract the truth, when we walk in a law that can't be inverted. You see, we don't fall for the inversion magic where someone is flipping what happiness truly is. There's a spiritual law of happiness. And like I said, in our mystical traditions, happiness is an emotion. Like we say, I feel happy. I don't feel happy. We think happiness is an emotion. That's bullcrap. You've been tricked into thinking that. Happiness is a byproduct of a vibrational symmetry with divine order. So it's just something that comes as a result. Like once I'm in alignment with divine order, there's this vibration that comes. We call it happiness. Psalm 1, if you read again in scripture, Psalm 1 describes that those who are truly happy are ones that are rooted in righteous counsel. They don't walk in the path of the wicked. Right. So in the Kabbalistic system, you have what's called the middle pillar. Right. And that's the path of balance between the extremes of severity and mercy. You have your left and right pillars, and then you have the one in the middle. The one in the middle, that pillar, excuse me, it produces harmony inside of the soul. You see, so a lot of times when a protagonist wins through chaos, rebellion, manipulation, or material excess, what we see is actually false light. That's happiness that's siphoned through the clip off. That the shell that sort of or that shell realm that offers glamour without essence. So a lot of times we'll start thinking that that's what happiness is. Like we'll watch a film. It could be like, oh, The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith and his son Jaden, right? And we're like, man, this man went through all of this and went through all that. He was homeless. They over there sleeping in bathrooms, public bathrooms and stuff like that. And then he finally gets the job at the end. Yay! You know what I'm saying? Like everybody's happy. Yay, he got the job. And you may not realize that that's not actual happiness. That's a false happiness because that's a shell happiness that offers you glamour without the essence of divine alignment. So in occultic terms, that energy is sort of harvested from the viewer, right? True spiritual energy gets harvested from the viewer by aligning them with emotional outcomes that break cosmic law. You see, that's a very important thing. The reality is that true happiness is the alchemical goal that emerges when, one, we reclaim our sacred names. Two, we reclaim our divine origins. Three, we reestablish identity beyond colonial constructs. By protecting the seed, protecting which is our generational bloodline and our spiritual inheritance, from spiritual and physical corruption. This is when happiness comes. When you walk in Torah law and cosmic law, and you bring your inner worlds and your outer worlds into resonance. It's like having two vibrations or two frequencies that you have access to. And let's say there's a like you could be playing music inside your home, right? And then someone outside your home is blasting music and they're clashing. So look at the inner home as your inner self, and the person playing the music outside is your outer self, right? And they could be playing, I don't know, some mumble jumble, whatever they listening to, the young folks is listening to, but whatever, right? They could be playing, some drill music, like, and then so you got something super hyper violent and super confrontative going on the outside, but inside you're playing, maybe love ballads of the '60s or something. And you want to get that inner resonance. So the love ballads of the '60s, that's in a certain note. Let's say you're playing a song that's in D major, and the drill music on the outside is playing in D sharp minor. That's going to create a vibrational clasp, a clash rather. Maybe one day I'll show you, like on the piano or something, what that sounds like. Sounds bad, and you can literally hear the waves going whoa, 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 whoa. But when you have a resonant sameness, you won't hear any whoa, 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 whoa. You'll just hear a smooth sound. Yeah, I think I'm gonna show you that example one day. It's pretty cool, especially when you're tuning a guitar. Some people may know about that. You can tune the guitar with itself, but when the strings are off with itself, you could literally feel the vibration. If you're holding the guitar in your lap, you'll feel like you'll feel the notes, the waves off, and that's how you could tune your guitar. That's how I tune until it's resonant throughout the neck, right? So again, when we looked at like the Woman King, we have the Queen's victory through bloodshed. Her victories through vengeance. And that is framed as empowerment. So now you're watching it and you're like, oh yeah, revenge will empower me and make me happy. But it's counterfeit happiness because it violates the law of divine balance between masculine and feminine order, right? When you look at, they clone Tyrone, you have Fontaine's realization of when he finally realizes he's a clone, it offers no joy, but it's only this hollow awareness of, my identity was stolen, right? So real happiness would have been reclaiming his true self beyond the manufactured persona. It's like when you wake up one day and you come into some conscious information, you're like, oh man, they did this to us and they did that to us. Yeah, they quote unquote, they did a lot of stuff to you. But yeah, you do need to know that's a part of the step. But like, you never really experience any true joy until you can discover and reclaim your identity beyond what was given to you. When you're able to do that, then you're able to say, okay, now I can stand on something as opposed to just standing on my anger, and standing on all the what things ain't. Well, this ain't right, and that ain't right, and that ain't right. Well, what is right? What is true? Who am I really? What am I really? When you look in the book of Clarence, Clarence is like sort of fleeting admiration as a false messiah evaporates the moment the truth is revealed. And that proves that counterfeit praise is not a foundation for lasting joy. It's like for me, for years in the music industry, this is a phrase we used to always hear. And I have experienced this, you're only as good as your last song. Like, well, not even your last song. They would say you're only as good as your last hit. So, if you had a hit one year and like, okay, I for me as a producer, you know, and a songwriter, man, I did well. I produced and I wrote or co-wrote the summer banger. You know, this year, like they were playing my song over and over and over on the radio, right? You can only ride on that for so long. You know, it's a Janet Jackson. What have you done for me lately? I might go into a label or a management team, and I have a back then a CD. You know, I used to have my music on CDs. And you sitting in the office, and they would always have these either radios or like sound systems in their office where they could hear the music, and they put your CD in, and they just be skipping, 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 skipping. You be like, oh man. I've had that experience where it's like, I'm not going to sell nothing today, you know, and you think you coming in with a CD of bangers and maybe you gave them their banger last year for their artist. You wrote something or you produced something that really took off and they're still making money off of it. And they say, yo, come, what, you got some other stuff? You got some new stuff? Yeah, I'm going to come out of office. And you come with a CD that's got 23, 24 songs on it and they put them in and you're like, all right, let me hear the next one. Let me hear the next one. Let me hear the next one. And they just telling their assistant to just skip, skip, skip. And you're like, oh, God. And you know, your best ones was the first two or three. Like they skip it right past, right past, right past, right past, right past. Because the light that you received last year, you know, or whatever the praise, it was just counterfeit praise. You know, it's not a foundation for any sort of lasting joy. And there's a difference when, you know, again, this, and you could apply this to so many different things, but there's times I've produced stuff, took off, did great. I've done songs that I didn't even like. You know, I didn't like them, but they took off. Like, okay, cool, well, pay me. But I ain't, that wasn't really nothing. Like I did that was lazy. You know, it was lazy work. And then you do something that you do put some effort into and nobody likes it. But you still have joy because it's like, this, I don't care. Like, this is good. You know, like you don't know what good is. You know, I always tell that story years ago when I was in the industry. I remember after working on the Case project that, or it was around that time actually. Touch Me Tease Me was out, and we were finishing up the full album, and I had brought some tracks in, like beautiful tracks, beautiful, but I was playing live bass, live guitar, and I think I had a couple of lines in there. I might have either been playing flute or trumpet on some of them. Really nice songs, like real nice music. And I remember playing them in the office. These guys are like music moguls now. I'm not gonna mention names, but they was like, yo, this sound like gospel. Like take some of that live music out. And I'm like, what? And I really was very sure at this time, we're talking 95, 96, somewhere around there, that I was like, yo, live music on top of samples and live music that's about to be the thing. Like, cause I already played instruments and I'm like, yo, it's not gonna be about all these samples. Like if you can blend live music with, you know, you still use your drum samples. So you got hard hitting drums. You can still use samples and stuff, but let's throw some little live guitar or whatever in there. It's going to give it a different kind of body, different kind of feel, make it more organic. Nobody was feeling it. Nobody. They was like, yo, just use the samples of what we call sound modules. Sound modules is, I don't want to do all this explanation, but it's where you would get fake sounds. Let's just say that, right? Those of you who do music, you know what I'm talking about. But I don't, you know, like, yo, just use the guitar and the sound module. But I really play the guitar and I play it well. Like, let's use this, right? And, you know, I tell the story because it was always so funny and everyone's like, nah, it sounds like gospel. Nah. You know, so you could judge the years because I don't remember the exact years, but I do remember I'm walking by the TV and I think I might have been over a relative's house, I think. And I just remember my little sister was sitting there watching like videos, whatever video show it was. I don't remember at that time. It might have been like 106 in Park or something. I don't remember. And it's 7 o'clock on the dot. Here's Usher with a live guitar in his song. It was a hit. And I'm sitting there like, these sons of guns, like I freaking told you, this is going to be the thing. And then after that, everyone started putting guitars in their song. The Fugees did Sweetest Thing, from the Love Jones soundtrack. Like, people would now put, the Roots came out, their whole band. Like, people were putting live instrumentation inside of R&B music, So that's an example of like, I still had joy because it was founded on a truth, right? As opposed to if I would have listened, because so instead of me just listening and seeking for their approval and their praise, part of the reason I didn't, I would have to say honestly, to be totally honest, was my own arrogance at that time. Because yes, I'm speaking to people who have more money than me, they have more power in the music industry, so forth and so on. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but you ain't got no talent really. You don't play an instrument, you don't sing, you can't even read music, you don't do none of this. You're just in. You just got in, but you ain't actually got no musical talent. So I'm over here trying to sell real music to people who are not even musical. So there's a part of me that was kind of arrogant, like, yeah, whatever. I'll strip it all out. I'll give you something in my mind at that time. Like, I'll give you something whack and cheap as long as you cut my check. But this is good music. I don't care what you say. This is good music. And I was right. So my joy wasn't founded on something that was counterfeit. So that's an important thing. And I'd say it's very important now in the world of social media, where a lot of times people happiness and joy is founded upon likes and people saying, hey, you look good, or somebody putting an emoji under your picture with hearts in their eyes and some crap like that. You're only as good as your last picture. You look great in this picture. Put up 3 pictures where it shows your fat rolls in your back, and let's see how many hearts and eyes you get. How many thumb down emojis you get. Boo, delete this. You might even get your picture reported to Instagram. So that's the thing. Like, you're only as good as your last thing when you're basing it on that false happiness. When you're looking at Raising Dion, again, that show, the closest glimpse of sort of an authentic happiness is when Dion uses his gift, his gifts, his abilities to protect others rather than elevate himself. So then in that moment, he aligns his power with his purpose, as opposed to trying to just make himself look good or whatever. But one thing to understand is that Babylon can entertain you. Babylon can seduce you, and Babylon can even reward you, but Babylon can't make you happy. Because Babylon, or I would say because happiness is forged inside of law, and law can't be colonized, you see. So when you look at where some of this comes from, we have the scripture that talks about principalities in high places. There's a scripted war, and you got to understand that film is not neutral. You might be like, I'm just watching this movie, or it's in the background or whatever. Film is a ritual warfare that's conducted on a global stage. So every major production that you've ever watched, it passes through the hands of gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are tied to occult orders, whether it be Jesuit circles, whether it be high degree masonry, or other secret networks that you don't even know the name of, because you'll know the name 50 years from now and think you're doing something. They don't already change the name and faces and everything. So they're not just executives at high levels that are making business decisions. That's everything in the art world, whether it's music, whether it's movies, whether it's 3-dimensional art, whether it's dance, whatever it is, you always have this sort of like invisible group of executives that you have to appeal to. Hey, I want to try to get my stuff here. I want to put on a show here. I want to do this to here. And you always have to appeal to someone. You might think they're just executives or, what was I saying? Business people who are making these decisions. But the truth is, they're stewards of spiritual programming. They are stewards of spiritual programming, and they have mandates. This is a reason why, when I come and I'm bringing live instrumentation to R&B music, which we don't even have R&B music anymore. We don't even use that term. You say R&B. If I told somebody, like if I go to Guitar Center or any music store right now, I'm picking up something, and somebody says, what kind of music you do? And I say R&B, I immediately, oh, that's Unk. They're going to start calling me Unk right there on the spot, because we don't even have R&B anymore. That whole genre is gone. Rhythm and blues That's what it stands for, rhythm and blues. We don't have it anymore, right? So you might just think that, oh, because people don't want it anymore. Yes, people want it. Yeah, people still want it. Luke James is still doing shows. Tyrese is still doing shows. I mean, I could go through the list. Duran Bernard is doing shows. Rashawn Patterson is doing shows. Layla Hathaway is doing shows. You know, Lettucey is still doing shows. Like, people still want R&B, right? But the executives, quote unquote, or those principalities in high places said, no, we got to get rid of that. We got to get rid of that, right? Because there's a certain thing that's being put forth. So you see that there's a sterilization and a simplifying of art that's been occurring over the years. You know, I remember during the New Jack era, New Jack Swing era of R&B, the music was a lot more happy. You know, it was upbeat. The colors were upbeat. You know, we wearing these bright neon colors, and you know, girls had the big dookie braids, I don't know what they call them now, but we call them dookie braids. And the door knockers, those are the big bamboo earrings, but we used to call them door knockers. Door knocker earrings, they would make all this noise every time she shake her head, clank, 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 because it was all that hollow, cheap 10-karat gold. But whatever, she still looked dope anyway. And the doodle braids. And, you know, brothers, we had on the 8-ball jackets, which was also bad symbology because black people were always behind the 8-ball. But we had on the 8-ball jackets and all these colorful colors, and the music was upbeat and happy. And if you wanted to be a music artist, you couldn't just sing and rap. You had to also dance and do flips and jump all in the sky and all that stuff like that. Then they got rid of it. No, 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 no. This is too celebratory. This is too colorful. This is too vibrant. This is leaning towards a spiritual space, and we got to start to slow this down and make it more dead and make it more sad. So then now you have this string of songs that's only talking about people cheating on you, you know, and all my misery and 7 days of misery, and if love should have brought you home last night and all this other stuff like that. And you might not realize that that's a spiritual programming, because those quote unquote executives, they have a mandate that's twofold. One, satisfy cosmic law by revealing fragments of truth. And that ensures that the Most High's rule of disclosure is not honored. You know, it is honored, excuse me. So the Most High requires that truth is still disclosed. So then you figure out a loophole. Okay, I'm going to honor that cosmic law to keep myself sort of like out of trouble, if you will, but I'm only going to reveal fragments of the truth, you see? And I'm going to immediately dilute that truth with inversions, with misdirections, and with distractions. So the masses will never act on it. So in that way, a prophecy can be shown to you, but at the same time, it could be weaponized, right? A righteous archetype might appear on the screen in one moment, but be paired with rebellion against divine law. So now the viewer unconsciously associates righteousness with lawlessness, you know, or you'll see a character that's doing something that needs to be done, doing something that's right, but they're a sexual deviant, you know, or you have these pairings in Hollywood where there'll be a character that's put in front of you or a person plays the most amazing characters, but then you see in their private life that they are not allegiant to their people. We'll just put it that way. You know, their mating choices or their political choices or their philosophies, they could care less about their people, right? So there's sort of this revealing, this disclosure of the archetype, but at the same time, there's this alignment where you put that archetype with a certain lawlessness. The tools are very precise. They're like razors. You know, sigils are embedded in logos. Sigils are embedded in costume designs. They're embedded in props. So now you have this energetic stamp that carries the intent straight into your subconscious. When you see the checkerboard floors and the tiled backdrops, you know, that's Masonic tracing boards that signal duality. And they're used to frame key revelations inside of the plot. Go back and look at cloning Tyrone and look at whenever you see that checkerboard floor, it's important. Then you have like pyramids and obelisks and establishing shots. Whenever you have an establishing shot, you'll see some sort of triangle shape or an obelisk or some sort of pyramid. And those are symbols of power hierarchies and the capstones of the elite. So now you'll see someone and you'll see a triangle near a pyramid with them. And they're showing you, regardless of what we name this character or their role in the film, this is the boss. This is where the hierarchy begins. You have numerology sequences where there's clocks, addresses. Look, a lot of times when you look at these movies and look at the numbers on people's jerseys, their sport jerseys, like whether it's a basketball jersey, football jersey, hockey jersey, so forth and stuff like that. Then there's a timing scenes to align with the cult planetary hours or specific ritual dates. Now, if you're untrained, you look at this stuff and you just see them as aesthetic choices. Like, oh, they just use that because that look cool, or that's a throwback jersey, and whatever. But if you're an initiate, you realize that these are rituals that are happening right out in the open. These are public rituals that are executed under the guise of entertainment. They're designed to shift the collective consciousness in a preordained direction. And truthfully, there's an unspoken rule where the more prophetic a message is, the more layered its camouflage is going to be. So, and they cloned Tyrone. The Masonic checkerboards inside of the lab scenes, they're not just set design. They mark key moments as ritual disclosures. In the book of Clarence, the number of disciples shown in certain scenes or certain camera shots, probably is a better way to put it, and certain shots mirrors hidden numerological sequences tied to the false Messiah archetype. So the patterns that you're seeing, they're not accidents. They're scripts written for both the seen and the unseen realms. Because you're thinking only humans are watching the movies. You don't realize that the spirits are watching them too. So that's why decoding is important and it matters, because the war is already in progress and the battlefield is your perception. Battlefield is your perception. I'll share with you a couple of little tricks you can use, like when you're reading prophetic codes inside a film, and so, like maybe even some exercise I could think of real quick that you can use to sort of practice. First thing, you got to understand that decoding is not a passive thing. Just like reading is not passive. You have people who say like, man, I read the Bible 5 times. Anybody who says they read a book 5 times, they read it passively, because people who've actually studied things, they don't say stuff like that. They shut up. I would never want to say I've read the Bible through and through 3 or 4 times, because then somebody may not want to teach me something about it. Oh, well, then you know all about it. And so let me go on to somebody else. I might say, yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've read it. I'm still working on it. I'm still studying, whatever it is. Right. So, but same thing with films. I could go back and watch a film that I may have watched 20, 30, 40 years ago, and I will pick something else out of that film. I promise you, I'll go back and watch Black Godfather or Disco 2000 or Sheba Baby, or freaking Coffee. You know what I mean? And I promise you, I will see something that I didn't see before, because decoding is not a passive thing. It's the work of an initiate who understands that art is never just art. Every frame is either aligning you with divine law or it's binding you to an inversion of what divine law is. That's when things are flipped upside down. So one of the things you always want to look at character arcs. Track the moral and the spiritual trajectory of the main characters. Does the hero rise in the film by aligning themselves with higher law, or by glorifying self-will and rebellion, right? Is redemption shown as a return to divine order, or is it shown as an escape from divine order? When you look at sort of a character's journey, it's a ritual in motion. So by empathizing with them, you're energetically rehearsing their choices. You see, you put yourself right in the middle of it. Another thing, of course, symbolism. Every color, every object, every number, every animal is a potential frequency trigger, right? So color, red oftentimes denotes blood or sacrifice or the planet Mars energy. Blue often suggests water or hidden knowledge or even truth. Gold can oftentimes signify divine authority, but when it's inverted gold will signify material greed. Animals, right? Birds are often messengers. Snakes often represent deception or transformation. Lions often can represent rulership, or they can represent pride. The context sort of determines whether that symbol is an aligned symbol, aligned with higher cosmic law, or if it's a inversion, if it's inverted, right? Look at your numbers. A lot of times you'll see threes. Threes represent divine completion. Six is man's perfection. Seven is spiritual perfection. 13 represents rebellion or represents transformation. Um, and they're not necessarily set pieces you're just looking at. There's sigils that work on your subconscious mind and they bypass your rational thought. They get right to the subconscious because you're perceiving them. You're perceiving them on a subliminal level that affects your subconscious. So you want to watch out for inversions, right? Watch for the reversal of moral polarity, right? Are righteous traits like obedience, discipline, service, are those things framed as weakness or framed as oppression? Pay attention to that. There's certain vices people may have, like pride, sensual indulgence, vengeance. Are those things framed as liberation or are they framed as justice? Inversion magic, when someone is practicing like an inversion spell or inversion magic, what it does is it works to make the unnatural seem natural. You see, that's inversion magic. It makes the unlawful seem righteous. So it's a conditioning. It begins to condition you to accept spiritual dissonance as the norm. Like if you've ever seen sometimes you'll see in films where they'll have scenes where a person is sort of like in a trance or they're possessed or like sort of like sleepwalking, and they'll maybe like walk up to a table, right? And it's a table full of food and they'll start eating the food, right? And then someone will come into the room and be like, so-and-so, hey, what are you doing? And they'll wake up or they'll come out of their trance and they'll be there eating like maggots or eating like rotten food with mold all over it or something like that, right? That's a light example of like an inversion, where that thing that is no good is made to seem good, Then also when you're decoding, you want to look for emotional transference. A lot of times a film can serve as a ritual for your own or a ritual of transference where your emotions become the offering. If you cheer for vengeance, like let's take a film series like Blade, right? Great film series, saved Marvel and all of that, right? And we love to see, Wesley Snipes doing his action thing and fighting and being a vampire and all that cool stuff that he was doing, but he's a vampire. Did you forget? He's basically a demon. Even you watch films like Hellboy. It's about a demon. Spawn. You know, um, so you look at these different things and what you're doing. You're cheering for something that you probably shouldn't be cheering for. Or if you're cheering for vengeance, you've made an offering in that moment to the spirit of vengeance. Like, let's say if you're watching a film and there's a woman who maybe is depicted in a way where like her husband isn't treating her well, right? Typical Tyler Perry film, right? And she cheats on her husband. And in the whole like movie theater, she's like, yeah, finally, yeah, yeah, yeah. You've just made a deal. You've made a pact in that moment with the spirit of infidelity. And you just think I'm just watching a movie. Like, yeah, he got what he deserved, man. He forgot her birthday. He forgot their anniversary. Yeah. So she kissed the gardener. Yeah, you just made a pact in that moment. And you've made an offering to that particular spirit. If you rejoice in rebellions against divine law, you've joined the rebellion in spirit. You have now joined that rebellion. So this is why the climax of a film is so critical. It's the sealing point of the covenant between the viewer and the narrative sort of spiritual alignment. I would say, like, practice this a little bit. You go back to the Woman King. Watch the Queen's initiation scenes. Make a note of the colors, the symbols, and the framing of submission to divine order as weakness. Identify which traits are glorified and which traits are vilified. When you look at They Clone Tyrone, pause the scenes during like the underground lab sequences and study the set design. I love set design. Like, I worked on films for many years. Well, film sets, let me clarify, not as a filmmaker, but as personal security. But I loved it because I got to see, you get to see a lot of the background stuff. But I used to love going into the, a lot of times film design, they have like these big like workshops. It's like, and it's just, for me, it's like a candy store, like they're building stuff. They're building whole rooms, building cabinets, building shelves. They build anything. When things get destroyed, which is so cool to watch because they have to build them. I remember watching one thing once where there was this scene where like this record player was being smashed to pieces. They don't use real stuff, so they had to, but they get the record player, and then they make a cast of it. And after they make the cast of it, then they paint it and everything. And everything is exact. It looks just like the record player. So when you get that scene where they're smashing it, it's like, because some of the things they destroy are like very, very expensive, right? So pay attention to set design because a lot of work goes into that stuff. It's not random. When you look at They Clone Tyrone, count the black and white tiles. Seriously. Count the black. I did it already, so I'm not sending you on a fool's errand. Count the black and white tiles. Pay attention to the lighting, and ask yourself, what does the symmetry or asymmetry symbolize? When you look at the book of Clarence, pay close attention to the number of followers Clarence has in different scenes. Count that. Do those numbers tie into sort of like known biblical or occult numerology, right? So make a note when you see that. Pay attention to like, how does the film reframe miracles without divine authority? If you're looking at Raising Dion, for instance, track how Dion's superpowers are used. When those superpowers are protective and when they're just self-serving. Make a note of like the presence of storm imagery, and most importantly, how the storm imagery aligns itself to his spiritual state. The thing is, these like little exercises you could do. If you can't identify the moral and spiritual law being followed or broken in the story, then that means you're watching whatever you're watching with your eyes open, but your discernment is closed. So prophetic codes, they demand that you watch as both the seer and you watch as a scribe. So you're extracting truth while you're rejecting sort of the hooks, if you will, of inversion. Many directors and creators are like unwitting prophets. They're putting certain specific symbolics or symbology within their films without knowing. A lot of them are prophets; they don't even realize it. Our filmmakers often operate as unconscious mediums. and they're vessels through which higher truths are transmitted. Sometimes despite their own intentions. I can definitely say that in the music field, I've known some prophetic, amazing composers and songwriters who were just absolute fools, off of their instrument or off of a microphone or out of the studio, just straight up fools, but they were tapped in a way despite their own intentions. I would say the same would go for film producers, film writers, film directors. In prophetic tradition, that's not really new. If you look at Hebraic scriptures, even kings and false prophets occasionally spoke words from the Most High without even knowing that they were doing that. So the same principle can be applied here. The art becomes the message, if you will, even when the artist is unaware of its full spiritual weight. I think about Jordan Peele. Jordan Peele crafts these layered sort of horror narratives that function sort of like waking dreams. If you look at the movie Get Out, we talk about the sunken place, right? It's a perfect visual metaphor for soul captivity and for psychic depression and of spiritual bondage in sort of both Kabbalah and African ancestral cosmology. In the film Us, which I thought was a great, shows some really interesting things. You have this sort of underground, tethered shadow archetypes, which those would be the clipothic doubles that I spoke about earlier. And they represent the parts of the soul that are left in darkness when society elevates only the surface self, and there's sort of like these dreamlike sequences where they work as prophecy for those who understand that liberation begins by reclaiming the shadow self. You got to look at your whole self and face it. That's the dark night of the soul. Ava DuVernay is her name. She sort of embeds themes of liberation, ancestral memory, and ancestral return. When you look at when they see us, which is another one, the framing of the boys as lambs to the slaughter sort of kind of mirrors again archetypes of sacrifice. It challenges the viewers to see the systemic machinery of Babylon's justice system. If you look at the movie Selma, when they're crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, it becomes at that point more than just a march. It's like a ritual crossing of a threshold, which of course echoes Exodus imagery of leaving bondage. Even without explicitly naming it, Duvernay's work vibrates with a sort of restoration kind of prophecy. Then you have I can just go on and on. I can go on and on. But like Boots Riley uses a lot of satire to unmask economic sorcery. And Sorry to Bother You, another great film. The use of like white voice. It's a modernized sort of mass ritual where this is invocation of a false identity to navigate the economic temple of capitalism. So the transformation of workers in equisapiens is it's an alchemical inversion, and it shows what happens when humanity merges with its beast nature in pursuit of profit. And that's a direct echoing of apocalyptic warnings about the beast system. In occult warfare, the enemy often attempts to bind the vision of these type of creators. It attempts to redirect their narratives through studio influence, through funding strings, and through distribution control. Somehow, though, those divine people still thread themselves into the work. The truth slips through symbols, it slips through numbers, it slips through names, and there's plots that no marketing department could fully sanitize it, even if they try. So when you're awake, and for the awakened, this creates a sort of dual responsibility where there's a code extraction. You mine the work, you mine the work for its embedded code or for its embedded prophecy while separating divine truth from human or demonic distortion. And the best thing is you act on it. A prophecy that is decoded but you don't act on is a seed left to die. It's like planting a seed in sand or like putting it on a rock, and you put it in barren soil, it's going to die. You know, um, so the creators may not necessarily know the full script they're writing, but you do. If you can see the code, then at that point, I would say you're no longer just an audience member. You're part of the prophecy's fulfillment. I would say that. Happiness is where we started, right? Going back to the top. Happiness is not in the film's applause moment. It's not in the credits rolling or in a crowd's reaction. Um, Happiness is in the stillness afterwards. When the spirit whispers that you've sort of just been handed a fragment of prophecy, that's happiness. When you decode, you're not just interpreting, you're reclaiming authorship. You take the script out of Babylon's hands, or you take the script from Babylon's stage and you return it to the scroll of the righteous. So in that moment, the film ceases to be entertainment and becomes a battleground. It kind of makes me think about like what Nat Turner did, taking Bible scriptures and using them as tools of liberation. So you start to see that every screening is a spiritual engagement. Every frame is either a weapon aimed at your soul or it's a key that unlocks your inheritance. You know, um, I would say the difference between those two, it lies in your discernment. So when you watch a film, watch as a warrior. Don't watch as a spectator. It's too dangerous. It's too dangerous to just consume what Babylon gives you. Don't consume the story, conquer the story. Because in a war for perception, uh, only those who can read the code will not only survive the plot, but they will also rewrite the ending of that story. So the age of passive watching is over. I would say that with all my heart. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to be initiated. You're here to be equipped. You're here to be deployed. So every code you catch is a weapon in your arsenal. Every inversion that you're able to expose is another like link in the chain that you've just broken, that chain around your foot, chain around your neck. Every truth you act upon is like a step towards building the world that Elohim actually intended. When you sit in a theater or you stream a series or you scroll through trailers, however you take in what you're taking, just remember that the stage belongs to Babylon, but the script belongs to those who can see. That's the most important thing. Take the code. You watch the film The Matrix and, Neo starts to see the binary and the code and what's happening around him. Take the code. When you learn the code, guard it, teach it, and move with the joy that comes only from alignment with divine law, because happiness built on truth is unshakable. And truth is the one thing that Babylon cannot counterfeit. That's what those of you who have it, don't be afraid to say it. Will you lose relationships? Yes. Will you lose lovers? Yes. Will you lose employment? Probably. But that's the only that's the only time, the only way that you're going to experience any real happiness is when you stand on that truth. You don't be a little sucker about it. All right. So I want to thank you all for tuning in, man. I wanted to just share some of that. And, also in response to things that I've also said in the past, where I have said myself in the past that Black movies don't have any subcontext to decode. I can no longer say that. I used to always kind of feel so embarrassed at some of the films that we got, because I'd be like, man, they putting out Inception and The Matrix and Dark World and Mind Walk, and I could just go on and on and on. All these amazing movies, The Fifth Element, even Riddick, Conan, Hercules, and it's like we got Big Mama's house. Meet the Clumps. And I'd be like, we don't have anything to decode, but that's not a true statement. It wasn't even a true statement then. It's just me whining about something, making up stuff. Because we've been doing amazing movies for years that, have given us space and room, to break down, decode, and dissect. We've been doing art for a long time, So I have said that before, but it's not true. I don't even know if I've said it publicly, but I'm still going to own it, But I just wanted to sort of give energy to Black cinema in that sense, and some of the cinema that has been coming out. And I just touched on a few. But whether it's a good decode or whether it's a bad, like I said, Woman King had a lot of little nasty little tricks in it. But this way you can kind of see the ritual that a lot of times you're a part of. That inversion magic, that inversion ritual is very prevalent in modern day film and cinematography. All right. So with that, I am going to exit, and I thank you for spending this time. And willfully, you wrote down every single film. You're going to go back and watch every single film and go back and take a note, even in the things that I'm sharing. Go back, pause, write down what I said. Okay, look at the floor tiles. Look at the colors they're wearing, the red and the gold. Look at the absence of male authority. Go back and look at those things. How many messiahs are in this scene? And make a note. And whatever you see, just throw it in the comments, man. Chop it up there. You may have already watched some of these things and done a breakdown. Let me see what you got. All right. I know I haven't done a movie decode in a very long time. I stopped doing them. I forget the last one I've done. It might have been Alita, Battle Angel. I think I did that on the Enlightenment Transformation channel. I did say I'm going to finally come back and do The Matrix. I've never done The Matrix, but I've shared so much information about it here and there that I actually thought I did do a decode. Because I feel like I've been talking about it forever, but I realized I never did an official Matrix decode. So I'm going to, at some point, do that, as well as probably Inception as well. Inception, Matrix, Dark City are so, similar, the three of them. But nonetheless, willfully, you can do your own decodes, and I would love to watch your videos, and see what you saw and get your takes. But until such time, I am Chief Yuya, head of the ANU Nation and the ANU Life Global Ministries. If you want to join up and be a part of this experience in this community and take in this vibration and this good energy and this good frequency, go to anulifeglobal.org and you can sign up there. You can donate there if you want to contribute to what we're doing, from the retreats to the work on the continent. My goal for next year's retreat is two things. One, have it on our own land, as I've been speaking about, here in the States. We have land, but the land that we have, I don't think could properly, in a pin, but it wouldn't accommodate. Right now, we have to still do some construction on it to accommodate us. But I want to get us another plot. I'm actually even considering selling what we have now and then putting that into something else that's more suitable. And the goal is also for next year's 2026, the 2026 retreat to actually be free. You know, the retreats are not much as it is now, but still, through the work, you see, I've put some guides up on the site that are free, but you can also give a donation if you feel like it. The Al Shabbat guide teach you how to enter into Sabbath properly, as well as the Mikveh guide, and there's more coming. And feel free to give a donation or not. I understand we're in a rough time, so if you ain't got it, you ain't got it. But even if you give $1, it's fine. But the goal is, it's a couple goals. I also want to take a contingency over to the continent. As many of you know, I'm back and forth here into the continent a lot, and just came back recently, actually. And it's time for us, I knew, to start taking some groups over and showing them, letting them meet their cousins, letting them, meet their long lost family across the waters. All right. So, feel free if you want to give donation or you want to join or grab some free information. It's all good. Just keep the vibe and the frequency circulating. That's what's most important. All right. Until such time, Chief Yah. Peace.